Sometimes the smallest mistake becomes the greatest miracle a heart will ever remember. Rain hammered against the windshield as Emily Parker tightened both hands around the steering wheel of her aging station wagon, trying to see through the gray curtain falling over the quiet streets of Portland. The windshield wipers struggled against the relentless storm, sweeping back and forth with a tired rhythm that matched the anxious beating of her heart. In the back of the car, dozens of carefully arranged bouquets filled every available space, their delicate roses, white lilies, eucalyptus, and fresh greenery prepared for a wedding scheduled to begin in less than 45 minutes. Every arrangement represented hours of careful work, every ribbon tied by hand after Lily had fallen asleep the night before. Emily could not afford to disappoint another customer. She already worked 6 days every week to provide a stable home for her 6-year-old daughter, and every successful delivery meant another month of groceries, school supplies, and hope quietly carried into tomorrow. She glanced toward the passenger seat where her phone displayed the address of the wedding venue along with several unanswered messages from the bride's assistant asking for an estimated arrival time. The rain suddenly intensified, turning the road ahead into a shimmering river of reflected headlights. Without warning, the old engine coughed once, then twice, before losing power completely. The station wagon rolled silently onto the narrow shoulder beneath an aging streetlight that flickered against the storm. Emily turned the key again. Nothing happened except another weak clicking sound. She rested her forehead against the steering wheel for a brief moment before taking a slow breath. Panic would not restart the engine. She stepped outside into the cold rain, quickly opening the back door to check the flowers. The bouquets remained safe beneath protective covers, but the clock continued moving forward without sympathy. Raindrops soaked her blonde hair within seconds as she searched unsuccessfully for passing traffic willing to stop. The road remained nearly empty. Returning to the driver's seat, she unlocked her phone with trembling fingers and opened the latest conversation with the bride's assistant. She quickly typed, "My car broke down. Here is my location. Please send someone if possible." Without carefully checking the contact, she pressed send and immediately shared her live location. A deep sigh escaped her as she leaned back against the seat, believing help was finally on the way. Several minutes passed with nothing except rain striking the roof above her. Then her phone vibrated. She looked down, expecting reassurance from the wedding team. Instead, an unfamiliar number appeared across the screen. The message contained only one short sentence. "Stay where you are." Emily frowned in confusion. She checked the conversation again and realized her mistake. The message had been sent to a completely unknown number. Her heart sank. Embarrassment mixed with frustration as she hurriedly typed another reply. "I am so sorry. I sent this to the wrong person." Before she could lock the screen, another message arrived almost instantly. "I know. Stay where you are anyway." Emily stared silently at the glowing words while thunder rolled somewhere beyond the distant hills. She looked through the rain-covered windshield toward the empty road stretching into the darkness. Logic told her no stranger would actually come. People had their own lives, their own problems, and no reason to rescue someone they had never met. She slipped the phone onto the passenger seat and wrapped both arms around herself, trying to stay warm as the rain continued falling without mercy. Nearly 15 minutes later, 2 bright headlights slowly emerged through the storm, growing larger with every passing second until a dark luxury sedan came to a gentle stop behind her stranded station wagon. The driver's door opened, and a tall man stepped into the rain carrying a freshly wrapped bouquet of flowers as though he had answered a call that destiny itself had quietly placed. Kindness always arrives more quietly than fear expects. Emily remained frozen beside her station wagon as the stranger walked through the rain, his dark navy suit already soaked beneath the relentless storm. He carried the fresh bouquet with surprising care, shielding it beneath his coat, while raindrops streamed from his hair onto the empty road below. When he finally reached her, he offered the flowers with a calm smile that somehow felt familiar despite the fact they had never met. "I thought the wedding might need these," he said. Emily blinked in disbelief before looking down at the bouquet. White lilies, ivory roses, eucalyptus, and delicate baby's breath had been arranged almost exactly like the bridal centerpiece resting safely inside her own vehicle. "You bought these?" she asked quietly. The man nodded as though there were nothing unusual about driving across the city for someone whose name he did not even know. "Your message sounded urgent." Emily lowered her eyes for a brief moment, embarrassed by the misunderstanding. "I sent it to the wrong number." His gentle smile remained unchanged. "I know." A soft laugh escaped her despite the rain and exhaustion weighing on her shoulders. It was the first time she had smiled all evening. "Most people would have ignored it." He glanced toward the aging station wagon before answering. "Most people probably would have. I had nowhere more important to be." Emily looked back at the bouquets filling the rear of the vehicle. "If I cannot get these flowers to the venue in time, someone is going to remember this wedding for all the wrong reasons." The stranger quietly studied the motionless station wagon before reaching into his pocket and removing his phone. He made one brief call. "Please arrange a tow truck for this location," he said calmly before ending the conversation less than 30 seconds later. Emily stared at him with surprise. "You did not have to do that." "I wanted to." He looked toward the back of his luxury sedan. "My trunk is empty. We can move the flowers into my car." Emily hesitated. Every lesson she had ever learned warned against trusting strangers. Yet everything about the man standing before her felt steady rather than reckless. His voice never rushed her. His eyes never asked for anything in return. Together they carefully transferred every bouquet into the spacious trunk and back seat of the sedan, protecting each arrangement from the rain with remarkable patience. The stranger handled every flower as though he had spent years inside a florist's shop instead of behind the wheel of an expensive automobile. Emily smiled with quiet amusement. "You know how to carry flowers." He looked at the bouquet in his hands. "My grandmother believed flowers deserved the same respect as people. She made me help in her garden every summer." Emily felt another small piece of her anxiety disappear. Within minutes the final arrangement had been secured. She climbed into the passenger seat, while the stranger gently closed her car door behind her. Warm air filled the elegant interior as rain continued tapping softly against the windows. The rich leather seats and clean scent of cedar contrasted sharply with the damp uncertainty she had been trapped inside only moments earlier. As they drove through the storm toward the wedding venue, Emily realized she had never even asked the question that mattered most. She turned toward him with genuine curiosity. "I am Emily," she said softly. "Thank you for helping me." The man glanced away from the rain-covered windshield for only a second before offering the same calm smile that had greeted her beneath the streetlight. "I am Daniel." Nothing about the introduction suggested wealth, influence, or success. To Emily, he was simply the stranger who had answered the wrong message as though it had somehow been meant for him all along. The closer they came to the wedding venue, the lighter the rain became, as though the storm itself had decided to step aside for a happier ending. Daniel guided the sedan through the entrance of a beautifully restored vineyard estate where warm lights glowed across the reception hall and anxious guests hurried beneath white umbrellas. Emily immediately noticed the bride's wedding coordinator pacing near the entrance while repeatedly checking her watch. Before the car had fully stopped, Emily thanked Daniel once more and quickly stepped outside. Together they carefully unloaded every arrangement, carrying bouquet after bouquet through the front doors with steady hands and quiet determination. The wedding coordinator rushed toward them with visible relief filling her face. "You made it!" she exclaimed. "We thought something terrible had happened." Emily offered an apologetic smile, while gently setting the bridal bouquet onto a nearby table. "My car broke down during the storm, but someone decided not to let today fall apart." She glanced toward Daniel, who simply continued arranging flowers exactly where she directed him without saying a word about everything he had already done. Within minutes the ceremony space transformed into the elegant vision the bride had imagined for months. White roses framed the altar. Soft greenery flowed along every aisle. Candles reflected against crystal vases, creating a warm glow that erased every trace of the storm outside. Emily adjusted one final ribbon before stepping back with a quiet breath of relief. The bride entered the room moments later, her eyes immediately filling with grateful tears as she admired the flowers. She embraced Emily warmly before whispering, "They are even more beautiful than I imagined." Emily felt the tight knot in her chest finally disappear. Every late night, every early morning, every sacrifice suddenly felt worthwhile. While everyone admired the floral arrangements, Daniel quietly slipped away toward the side entrance, hoping to leave without drawing attention to himself. Emily noticed him only after thanking the wedding coordinator and hurried after him into the cool evening air. The rain had almost stopped, leaving tiny drops sparkling beneath the venue lights. "Daniel!" she called gently. He turned with the same calm expression she had first seen beside the roadside. Emily walked toward him carrying the bouquet he had purchased earlier. "These never became part of the wedding." He looked down at the flowers before smiling softly. "Then they finally found their purpose." He handed them back to her. "Take them home." Emily hesitated. "I cannot accept something this beautiful after everything else you have already done." "You already accepted the help," he replied. "The flowers simply complete the story." His answer made her laugh again, a little more freely this time. For a brief moment either of them spoke. The sounds of distant music drifted from inside the reception hall, while the last raindrops slid from the tree branches overhead. Emily realized she still knew almost nothing about the man standing before her. He had never mentioned his work, his family, or why he had chosen to answer a message that was never meant for him. Before she could ask another question, Daniel reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and removed a simple white business card. There was no dramatic gesture, only quiet sincerity. "If your tow truck gives you any trouble tomorrow, call me," he said. Emily accepted the card without studying it, assuming it belonged to an ordinary office somewhere in the city. She slipped it into her apron pocket with a grateful smile. "I hope I never have to bother you again," she said. Daniel smiled gently. "Sometimes the best things begin as unexpected interruptions." With that, he wished her a peaceful evening, stepped into his sedan, and disappeared into the quiet Portland night, leaving Emily standing beneath clearing skies with a bouquet in her arms and a business card she would not truly understand until the following morning. Morning sunlight spilled through the front windows of Parker Flowers, replacing the gray storm clouds with soft, golden light that danced across rows of fresh blooms. Emily unlocked the front door just after 8 o'clock, carrying the bouquet Daniel had given her the night before. It rested on the counter beside the register, somehow making the little shop feel brighter before the first customer had even arrived. Lily sat at a small table near the back, coloring pictures between bites of cereal before school. She looked up with a curious smile. "Did the nice man make it home?" Emily smiled while placing fresh water into the vase. "I hope he did." After opening the shop, Emily remembered the business card tucked safely inside her apron pocket. She planned to call only to thank Daniel again after confirming that her station wagon had reached the repair garage. Without much thought, she placed the simple white card onto the counter. There was no colorful design or oversized logo. Just elegant black lettering, printed with remarkable simplicity. Daniel Brooks, Founder and Chief Executive Officer, Brooks Capital Group. Emily quietly repeated the words to herself before opening the old laptop beside the register. She typed his name into an internet search, expecting perhaps the owner of a successful local business. Instead, page after page filled the screen. National business magazines, television interviews, charity events, economic conferences, headlines describing one of the youngest billionaire entrepreneurs in America. Photographs showed the same calm smile she had seen beneath the rain, except now he stood beside governors, business leaders, and international investors. Emily leaned back in complete silence. The man who had carried flower arrangements through the storm without hesitation was responsible for a company employing thousands of people across the country. She clicked another article describing Brooks Capital Group's investments in community redevelopment, sustainable housing, and small business partnerships. Another featured Daniel receiving recognition for anonymous charitable donations that had only become public years later. None of the articles mentioned luxury cars or private islands. Instead, they repeatedly described a leader who preferred quiet results over public attention. Emily closed the laptop slowly, trying to connect the polished executive in those photographs with the man who had patiently loaded bouquets into his own car, as though he had nothing more important to do. Lily wandered over and noticed Daniel's picture still displayed on the screen. "Is that your new friend?" she asked innocently. Emily smiled despite her surprise. "Maybe." Lily tilted her head. "He looks kind." Emily looked once more at the photograph before answering. "He does." Just then the repair garage called to explain that the station wagon needed a replacement fuel pump and would not be ready until the following afternoon. Emily thanked the mechanic before glancing at the business card again. For several moments she debated whether to call. Finally, she picked up the phone and dialed the number. She expected an assistant, perhaps several layers of receptionists, before reaching anyone important. Instead, after only 2 rings, a familiar voice answered with quiet warmth. "Good morning, Daniel speaking." Emily almost forgot why she had called. "I only wanted to thank you again," she said softly. "I also wanted to apologize. If I had known who you were, I never would have asked you to help." A gentle silence followed before Daniel replied. "Emily, if you had known who I was, you probably would not have sent the message at all." She laughed quietly because she knew he was right. "That mistake seems larger every hour," Daniel answered with the same calm certainty she remembered from the roadside. "I think it was exactly the right size." Those simple words stayed with Emily long after the call ended, leaving her with the growing realization that despite everything she had learned about Daniel Brooks, the most remarkable thing about him had never appeared in any headline. The strongest friendships rarely begin with grand promises. They grow quietly through ordinary days that become impossible to forget. Nearly 2 weeks passed before Emily saw Daniel again. Life returned to its familiar rhythm inside Parker Flowers. Fresh deliveries arrived before sunrise. Customers wandered through the little shop searching for birthday bouquets, anniversary roses, and sympathy arrangements that carried emotions words often could not express. Lily returned from school every afternoon and completed her homework at the small wooden table beside the front window, while Emily carefully prepared orders for the following morning. The memory of the rainy evening slowly settled into something that felt almost dreamlike until one Saturday morning the front door chimed softly. Emily looked up from trimming fresh hydrangeas and found Daniel standing near the entrance wearing dark jeans, brown boots, and a simple navy sweater instead of the tailored business suits she had seen in newspaper photographs. He carried no assistants, no security, and no sign that one of the country's most successful executives had just walked into a neighborhood flower shop. He smiled with the same quiet warmth that had first greeted her beside the roadside. "Good morning," he said. Emily returned the smile almost automatically. "Good morning. What brings you here?" Daniel slowly looked around the shop, admiring shelves filled with colorful arrangements. "I realized I never actually bought flowers for myself." Emily laughed softly. "Most people do not." "Maybe they should," Daniel replied. "A room feels different when something living is inside it." Emily spent several minutes helping him choose a simple arrangement of white lilies mixed with eucalyptus and seasonal greenery. He listened carefully as she explained how often to change the water and where to keep the vase away from direct afternoon sunlight. He treated every suggestion as though she were teaching something genuinely valuable. Before leaving, Daniel paid without mentioning discounts or favors and thanked her as though she had done something extraordinary. The following Saturday he returned again. This time he purchased sunflowers because they reminded him of the garden his grandmother once cared for every summer. Another week later he stopped by simply to replace flowers that had reached the end of their natural beauty. Soon his Saturday visits became part of the gentle rhythm of the shop. Customers began recognizing the familiar man who always waited patiently in line, greeted everyone politely, and never seemed interested in being recognized himself. Lily especially looked forward to Saturdays. She often sat behind the counter drawing colorful pictures while Emily worked. One weekend Daniel noticed a half-finished sketch of a butterfly resting beside her crayons. "That is beautiful," he said sincerely. Lily smiled proudly. "Butterflies always find flowers." Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "I think flowers probably help butterflies find home too." From that day forward he never arrived without bringing Lily something small. Sometimes it was a new coloring book from a local bookstore. Sometimes it was a packet of wildflower seeds. Once he brought a beautifully illustrated book about American birds after Lily mentioned seeing blue jays outside her classroom window. None of the gifts were expensive. Every one of them reflected something she had casually shared during previous conversations. Emily quietly noticed the difference. Wealth could buy impressive presents, but attention required genuine care. One peaceful Saturday afternoon, after helping an elderly customer carry several potted orchids to her car, Daniel returned inside brushing a little soil from his hands. Emily watched him for a moment before speaking. "You could spend your weekends anywhere in the world." Daniel looked around the little flower shop filled with fresh scents, sunlight, and gentle conversation before answering. "Maybe. But lately this seems like the place I would rather be." Emily lowered her eyes toward the bouquet she was wrapping, unable to hide the quiet smile slowly appearing across her face as she realized the distance between their two very different worlds had already begun to shrink without either of them trying to make it happen. Nothing tests quiet happiness faster than the fear of losing the place that helped it grow. Autumn arrived with cool mornings, golden leaves drifting across the sidewalks, and the comforting scent of cinnamon drifting from the bakery 2 doors down from Parker Flowers. The neighborhood moved at an unhurried pace that reminded Emily why she had never wanted to leave this part of Portland. Every storefront carried its own history. The bookstore owner greeted children by name. The family-owned cafe remembered every customer's favorite drink. Elderly couples still walked hand in hand beneath maple trees that had stood there for generations. Parker Flowers belonged to that same story. Emily had spent years transforming the little shop into more than a business. It had become the place where birthdays began, anniversaries were celebrated, babies were welcomed home, and final goodbyes were softened by fresh flowers arranged with genuine care. On a quiet Tuesday afternoon, the familiar peace was interrupted by a certified envelope waiting beneath the front door. Emily wiped her hands on her apron before opening it, expecting another routine notice from the property manager. Instead, her smile slowly disappeared. The building had been sold to a national development company. Every tenant on the block had received notice that their leases would not be renewed. The entire row of historic storefronts was scheduled for demolition to make room for a luxury mixed-use development featuring high-rise apartments, upscale retail spaces, and underground parking. Existing businesses would have 90 days to vacate the property. Emily read the letter twice, hoping she had misunderstood something. She had not. Her hands trembled slightly as she folded the notice back into the envelope. Lily noticed the change in her mother's expression almost immediately after school. "What happened?" she asked softly. Emily forced a reassuring smile before kneeling beside her daughter. "We might have to find a new shop." Lily looked around the familiar room filled with colorful flowers, wooden shelves, and photographs of happy customers that decorated one entire wall. "But this is our flower shop." Emily gently brushed a loose strand of hair away from Lily's face. "I know." That evening, after locking the front door, Emily remained alone inside the quiet store long after sunset. She slowly walked from one arrangement to another, touching tables Daniel had helped move, smiling at the little reading corner where Lily completed homework every afternoon, and remembering the countless moments that had quietly filled the space with life. It was never just about the building. It was about the memories growing inside it. Saturday arrived, and right on time the front door chimed softly. Daniel entered carrying his usual empty vase, expecting another peaceful visit. One look at Emily told him something had changed. The warmth that usually welcomed customers had been replaced by quiet worry she could not completely hide. He waited until the last customer had left before speaking. "What happened?" Emily hesitated for several seconds before handing him the folded notice. Daniel read every page carefully without interrupting. His expression remained calm, but his eyes lingered on the details longer than before. He slowly folded the papers and returned them to Emily. "Have they spoken with the business owners?" Emily shook her head. "Only lawyers and letters." Daniel glanced through the front window toward the neighboring shops lining the street. The cafe owner stood outside stacking chairs. The bookstore lights still glowed warmly despite the fading afternoon. Families continued walking along the sidewalk without realizing how close the neighborhood stood to disappearing. Daniel remained silent for another moment before looking back at Emily. "Sometimes people think they are buying buildings," he said quietly. "They forget they are also buying the lives inside them." Emily lowered her eyes, uncertain what could possibly be done against a corporation with endless resources. Daniel placed the notice carefully on the counter beside the register, his voice remaining as calm as ever. "Do not make any decisions today. Give me a little time. I would like to understand the whole story before anyone writes the ending." Real wealth is measured by the number of lives that remain standing after the decision is made. The following week unfolded beneath an uneasy silence that settled over the neighborhood like early winter fog. News of the redevelopment spread quickly from one storefront to the next. The owner of the bookstore quietly packed several rare first editions into storage boxes, uncertain whether he would ever reopen somewhere else. The elderly couple who had operated the family bakery for more than 30 years began discussing retirement they had never planned to take. The owner of the small coffee shop stared through the front window more often than she greeted customers. Emily continued arranging flowers every morning, determined not to let worry steal the kindness her customers depended upon, yet every bouquet she wrapped carried the quiet weight of uncertainty. She avoided discussing the future with Lily, choosing instead to fill their evenings with homework, homemade dinners, and bedtime stories that still ended with hope. Daniel never called to make promises he could not guarantee. Instead, he spent the next several days listening. He met privately with every business owner along the block, asking questions few executives ever bothered to ask. He wanted to know how many families depended on each shop, how long they had served the neighborhood, what traditions had been created inside those walls, and what would truly be lost if the buildings disappeared. He walked the sidewalks without an entourage, stopping to shake hands with longtime customers who shared memories stretching back decades. He spoke with city planners, preservation specialists, and community leaders. He studied architectural records late into the evening and reviewed redevelopment proposals line by line. The more he learned, the clearer one truth became. The buildings themselves were valuable, but the people inside them were irreplaceable. The following Friday, Daniel requested a meeting with the development company's executive team. Rather than arguing emotionally against progress, he presented a different vision. Brooks Capital Group would establish a community preservation partnership that invested in restoring the historic block instead of demolishing it. Modern infrastructure could be added behind preserved storefronts. Energy efficiency could be improved without erasing the neighborhood's identity. Small businesses would receive long-term affordable leases, while carefully designed residential spaces could still be created nearby without forcing generations of local families to disappear. The proposal balanced financial growth with community stability, demonstrating that responsible investment and human dignity did not have to compete against one another. The executives listened far longer than they had expected to. Numbers supported every recommendation, but the heart of the presentation rested on something no spreadsheet could calculate: neighborhood trust. Several days later, Emily unlocked Parker Flowers as she had done hundreds of mornings before. She expected another ordinary workday until she noticed people gathering outside. Shop owners stood together along the sidewalk, speaking in excited whispers. The property manager approached carrying a folder, but this time his expression held relief instead of formality. Every business owner received a revised agreement confirming that demolition had been cancelled. The redevelopment company had accepted a preservation partnership led by Brooks Capital Group. Existing businesses would remain open, while restoration work improved the block over the coming months. Emily read the letter twice before her eyes slowly filled with grateful tears. Around her, applause spread from one storefront to another. The bakery owners embraced each other. The bookseller removed his glasses to quietly wipe his eyes. Customers passing by joined the celebration without fully understanding what had just been saved. Daniel arrived a few minutes later carrying his usual empty flower vase, dressed no differently than any other Saturday. Emily walked toward him holding the letter with both hands. "You did this," she whispered. Daniel gently shook his head. "No." He looked along the sidewalk where neighbors smiled at one another with renewed hope. "All of this already mattered. I simply helped other people see what was standing here all along." Emily realized in that moment that the greatest gift Daniel had ever offered was never his influence, or his success. It was his refusal to believe that ordinary people should ever be treated like they were easy to replace. The moments that change how the world sees someone are almost never planned. A few weeks after the neighborhood celebration, Saturday mornings settled back into their familiar rhythm. Fresh flowers filled the shelves at Parker Flowers, the cafe next door hummed with quiet conversations, and children laughed beneath trees that now seemed destined to watch over another generation. Emily felt something she had not experienced in months. She no longer unlocked the front door wondering whether it might be one of the last times. Instead, every sunrise carried possibility. Daniel continued visiting every Saturday exactly as before. Nothing about him suggested that he had quietly altered the future of an entire neighborhood. He still waited patiently in line behind every customer. He still carried the same simple glass vase that needed fresh flowers each week. Lily still greeted him with enthusiastic stories about school projects, library books, and the tiny sunflower seedlings beginning to sprout from the seeds he had given her months earlier. That Saturday afternoon, after choosing a fresh arrangement of yellow daisies and white roses, Daniel offered to help Emily deliver several bouquets to nearby businesses before the lunch rush. The crisp autumn air carried the scent of fallen leaves as they walked together along the familiar sidewalks, Lily skipping happily between them while carefully carrying a small basket of wrapped carnations. Near the corner grocery store, an elderly woman stepped onto the sidewalk carrying several heavy paper bags filled with groceries. Before anyone could react, one of the bags split open. Apples rolled across the sidewalk. Fresh bread slid onto the pavement. Boxes of cereal and canned soup scattered in every direction. The woman stood frozen with quiet embarrassment as passing pedestrians hesitated, unsure whether to stop. Emily immediately knelt to gather the groceries without saying a word. Lily chased after the rolling apples with determined little steps, laughing each time she rescued another one before it reached the street. Daniel calmly removed his jacket, placing it across the damp sidewalk so the fresh bread could be set down without touching the ground. He collected the remaining bags, carefully redistributing the weight so nothing else would tear. Within only a few minutes, everything had been packed again. Emily gently asked where the woman lived. "Only 2 blocks away," she answered softly. Daniel smiled. "Then let us finish the trip together." The 4 of them walked slowly through the neighborhood, carrying groceries beneath colorful maple trees while the elderly woman shared stories about living there for more than 40 years. She remembered when Parker Flowers had first opened, when the bakery sold cinnamon rolls for less than $1, and when children still rode bicycles until the streetlights came on. Emily listened with quiet admiration, while Lily asked endless curious questions that made the woman laugh more than once. None of them noticed a college photography student sitting outside the cafe across the street. She quietly lifted her camera after seeing the unexpected scene unfold. Instead of focusing on famous landmarks or dramatic moments, she captured something much simpler. A successful businessman carrying grocery bags. A florist walking beside an elderly neighbor. A smiling little girl holding apples with both arms. Golden afternoon sunlight filtered through the autumn leaves, surrounding them with a warmth that could not be staged. The student smiled to herself before uploading the photograph later that evening with a short caption. "Sometimes kindness still chooses ordinary streets." By sunrise the next morning, thousands of people had already shared the image. No names appeared beneath the photograph. No titles identified anyone. The picture spread because it reminded strangers across America of something many feared had quietly disappeared. Compassion that expected absolutely nothing in return. Recognition has a way of changing the room long before it changes the people inside it. By Monday morning, the photograph had spread far beyond Portland. Local news stations praised the quiet act of kindness, national websites shared the image with messages about compassion, and millions of people paused for a brief moment to remember that ordinary goodness still existed. At first, no one knew the identities of the three people walking beneath the golden maple trees. The comments focused on the little girl smiling while carrying apples, the florist helping without hesitation, and the well-dressed stranger who had laid his jacket across the sidewalk to protect a loaf of bread. Then someone recognized Daniel Brooks. Within hours, headlines changed. The anonymous businessman became the billionaire founder of Brooks Capital Group. Television commentators discussed his business career. Financial magazines republished old interviews. Reporters praised his role in preserving the historic neighborhood while others questioned whether the photograph had been carefully planned for publicity. Emily read several of the articles during a quiet moment inside the flower shop before gently closing the browser. She knew exactly what had happened that afternoon. There had been no cameras, no speeches, and no announcement. Daniel had never even noticed someone taking a photograph. Still, she understood why strangers who had never met him found it difficult to believe. Wealth often made people suspicious instead of hopeful. By Tuesday, reporters began visiting the neighborhood hoping to interview local business owners. Emily politely declined every request. She had no desire to become part of a national conversation. Parker Flowers had always been a place where people came to celebrate life's happiest moments, or quietly comfort one another during its hardest seasons. She wanted to protect that peace. Daniel also refused every interview. His office released only a brief statement thanking the community while reminding reporters that countless acts of kindness happened every day without photographs or headlines. The attention gradually shifted elsewhere, but something inside Emily had quietly changed. Saturday arrived once again, yet this time she found herself looking through the shop window before Daniel appeared. When his familiar sedan finally parked across the street, she noticed several people immediately recognize him. Some smiled warmly. Others pointed toward him while whispering. Daniel greeted everyone with the same calm courtesy as always, but the simplicity of his visits had disappeared. Inside the flower shop, Lily ran toward him with the joyful excitement of a child untouched by public opinion. She proudly showed him a blue ribbon she had earned for a school art project, and Daniel celebrated the accomplishment as though it were the most important news of the day. Emily watched them quietly while wrapping a bouquet for another customer. She realized the headlines had not changed Daniel at all. They had changed her. For the first time since their friendship began, she found herself wondering whether their worlds could ever truly fit together. She belonged to quiet mornings, neighborhood customers, and simple routines measured one bouquet at a time. Daniel belonged to boardrooms, international meetings, and responsibilities that reached far beyond one city block. Even if he chose to spend Saturdays inside her little flower shop, the rest of his life existed on a scale she could barely imagine. Later that afternoon, after Lily had gone next door to buy fresh cookies from the bakery, Emily stood beside the front window watching autumn leaves drift across the sidewalk. Daniel noticed the thoughtful expression she could not quite hide. "You have been unusually quiet today," he said gently. Emily hesitated before offering an honest smile touched by uncertainty. "I was just thinking about how easy it is to meet someone before you know who they are." Daniel looked toward the same sidewalk where strangers continued passing by without hurry. "And what did you decide?" Emily lowered her eyes for a brief moment before answering softly. "I am still trying to figure out whether knowing more brings people closer together or quietly pulls them farther apart. Character is revealed most clearly when nobody is watching anymore." The excitement surrounding the photographs slowly faded as another news cycle captured the country's attention. Television crews disappeared from the neighborhood, online conversations moved elsewhere, and the sidewalks outside Parker Flowers quietly returned to the peaceful rhythm that had always defined them. Emily noticed the silence almost immediately. Customers stopped asking whether the famous businessman still visited the shop. Reporters no longer waited across the street. The little flower shop once again smelled of fresh roses, cedar shelves, and morning coffee drifting in from the cafe next door. Yet one question remained quietly planted inside her heart. Had Daniel been drawn there by a single extraordinary moment, or would he continue showing up after the attention had disappeared? Saturday answered that question before noon. The familiar chime above the front door rang softly, and Daniel stepped inside carrying the same clear glass vase he had brought every week for months. He wore another simple sweater, greeted every customer with a warm smile, and patiently waited while Emily finished wrapping a bouquet for a young couple celebrating their first anniversary. Nothing about him suggested he had spent the previous week leading board meetings worth millions of dollars. Nothing about him hinted that newspapers still occasionally mentioned his name. When his turn finally came, he smiled exactly as he always had. "Good morning, Emily." She smiled back almost instinctively. "Good morning, Daniel." He walked slowly through the shop, stopping beside a display of autumn chrysanthemums. "These remind me that every season deserves its own colors," he said thoughtfully. Emily selected several stems and began arranging them inside his vase. "I thought successful executives only noticed numbers," she teased gently. Daniel laughed quietly. "Numbers explain businesses. Flowers explain people." Emily looked up at him for a moment before lowering her eyes to continue arranging the bouquet. She remembered every article she had read, every television interview she had avoided, and every doubt that had quietly grown inside her over the past week. Yet the man standing across from her remained exactly the same person who had carried flowers through a storm for a stranger. Before either of them could continue the conversation, the front door opened once more. An elderly customer entered carrying a small potted fern with obvious disappointment written across her face. "I think I accidentally overwatered it," she said apologetically. Emily gently examined the plant while Daniel listened nearby. "It might recover," Emily said kindly. "Let us repot it with fresh soil." Without hesitation, Daniel rolled up the sleeves of his sweater and quietly helped carry bags of potting mix from the storage room. Together they spread newspaper across a work table before carefully transplanting the struggling fern into a new ceramic pot. Lily joined them after finishing a drawing in the back of the shop, happily brushing loose soil from the leaves with a tiny paintbrush Emily normally used for delicate arrangements. 20 minutes later, the little fern stood upright once again. The elderly woman smiled with visible relief. "I cannot thank all of you enough," Daniel simply replied. "Sometimes living things only need another chance." After she left, Emily noticed that Daniel had glanced at his watch only once during the entire afternoon. She knew enough about his responsibilities to understand that he had almost certainly delayed something important without mentioning it. "Did you cancel work to stay here?" she asked quietly. Daniel looked toward the front window where sunlight rested across rows of fresh flowers. "Work will still be waiting on Monday," he answered calmly. "This afternoon only happens once." Emily felt the last of her uncertainty begin to soften. Headlines had introduced her to a billionaire. Saturdays had introduced her to a man whose priorities never seemed to change, even after the cameras had quietly disappeared. Trust is never built in a single extraordinary moment. It grows quietly through countless ordinary ones that never ask to be remembered. Winter arrived gently, wrapping Portland in crisp mornings and soft gray skies that made the warm lights inside Parker Flowers feel even more inviting. Evergreen wreaths decorated the front windows, fresh pine branches filled the shop with a comforting fragrance, and red berries added small touches of color to every display. Emily noticed that customers lingered a little longer during the colder months, often staying to enjoy warm conversation before stepping back into the chilly afternoon air. Daniel continued arriving every Saturday with the same familiar glass vase in his hands. Nothing about his routine ever changed. He still greeted Lily before anyone else, asking about school, her latest drawings, or the books she had borrowed from the library. He still listened carefully when Emily described new flowers arriving with each season, asking thoughtful questions that made her smile because he genuinely wanted to learn. One Saturday morning, The neighborhood association organized volunteers to plant winter shrubs and prepare the small community garden beside the historic block for spring. Emily closed the flower shop early so she and Lily could help. Daniel arrived a few minutes later wearing sturdy work boots, blue jeans, and a thick flannel jacket that looked far more comfortable than anything he had ever worn inside a corporate office. Together they spent the afternoon spreading fresh mulch, trimming old branches, and planting rows of hardy flowering bulbs that would remain hidden beneath the soil until warmer weather returned. Lily happily carried small watering cans from one flower bed to another, proudly announcing that every bulb deserved a chance to become beautiful. Daniel smiled every time she repeated the sentence, carefully kneeling beside her to show how deeply each bulb should be planted. As the afternoon sunlight faded behind the bare trees, the volunteers gathered around the wooden picnic table where neighbors shared homemade soup, fresh bread, and warm apple cider. Conversations drifted easily from holiday traditions to childhood memories. Nobody discussed business, wealth, or success. Daniel listened more than he spoke, laughing at old neighborhood stories and thanking everyone who had spent the day working together. Emily watched him from across the table and quietly realized she had stopped seeing the billionaire everyone else recognized. The expensive headlines, television interviews, and polished magazine covers had slowly disappeared from her thoughts. In their place stood the man who always carried heavy boxes without being asked, remembered Lily's favorite books, knew the names of elderly customers, and never left before making certain everyone else had what they needed. Later, after most of the volunteers had gone home, Emily and Daniel remained in the quiet garden while Lily chased a pair of curious sparrows across the open lawn. The newly planted beds rested beneath fresh mulch, waiting patiently for a season they could not yet see. Emily looked across the peaceful neighborhood before speaking softly. "When I first learned who you were, I thought our lives were too different." Daniel turned toward her with the calm expression she had come to trust. "Do you still think that?" Emily slowly shook her head. "No." She smiled gently while watching Lily laugh in the fading afternoon light. "I realized something." Daniel waited without interrupting. "I never trusted your title," she said quietly. "I trusted the man who kept showing up after nobody was paying attention anymore." Daniel looked toward the flower beds stretching across the garden before answering with the same quiet honesty that had guided every conversation since the rainy evening they first met. "The people we're staying for are never temporary." A cool breeze carried the scent of pine through the garden as Emily stood beside him, understanding at last that some relationships are never built by extraordinary promises. They are built by ordinary Saturdays repeated often enough to become the safest place a heart has ever known. 1 year can quietly transform a place when enough people choose kindness over convenience. Spring returned to Portland with clear skies, gentle sunshine, and rows of colorful blossoms stretching across the restored historic neighborhood. The community garden that had once rested beneath winter soil now overflowed with tulips, daffodils, and wildflowers planted by neighbors whose faith had been rewarded one season at a time. Parker flowers had never looked more beautiful. Fresh paint brightened the storefront, while carefully restored brickwork preserved the character that generations of families still recognized. New benches lined the sidewalks, hanging flower baskets decorated every streetlight, and local musicians often filled Saturday mornings with soft acoustic melodies drifting through the open air. Emily unlocked the shop each morning with the same quiet gratitude she had carried since the preservation agreement had been signed. Business had grown steadily over the past year, not because of publicity, but because customers genuinely loved the warmth they found inside the little flower shop. Weddings, birthdays, graduations, anniversaries, and everyday moments of appreciation continued filling her calendar. She had even hired a young assistant from the neighborhood, giving another local family the opportunity to build a future close to home. Lily, now a confident 7-year-old, eagerly helped after school by arranging ribbons, watering small plants, and greeting familiar customers with the cheerful smile everyone had come to expect. She had grown taller, her curiosity had only deepened, and every Saturday she still waited near the front window a few minutes before noon. She never needed a clock to know when Daniel would arrive. Somehow he always did. His weekly visits had become as dependable as the changing seasons. Some Saturdays he came directly from the airport carrying only a small travel bag before stopping at the flower shop on his way home. Other weekends he arrived wearing work boots after volunteering at another community project somewhere across the city. His schedule remained demanding, yet he never treated the people waiting for him inside Parker Flowers as appointments that could simply be moved to another day. Emily quietly noticed that consistency more than anything else. One sunny afternoon, the neighborhood held its annual Spring Bloom Festival to celebrate the restored historic district. Families filled the sidewalks, children painted flower pots, local artists displayed handmade crafts, and every storefront contributed something to the celebration. Parker Flowers created a large floral arch near the entrance to the community garden, inviting visitors to walk beneath fresh blossoms before exploring the festival. Daniel spent the morning helping volunteers assemble tables, hanging decorations, and carrying boxes without anyone asking him to do so. Most visitors recognized him now, but the excitement surrounding his name had softened into simple respect. He was no longer viewed as the billionaire who had saved a neighborhood. He had become one of the neighbors who always showed up. As the afternoon sun settled across the garden, Emily stood beside the floral arch watching families laugh together beneath branches covered with fresh green leaves. Daniel joined her carrying 2 cups of lemonade from the cafe next door. For several quiet moments neither of them spoke. They simply watched Lily helping younger children plant tiny marigolds in painted clay pots. Emily smiled gently before breaking the comfortable silence. 1 year ago I thought everything was ending. Daniel looked around the thriving neighborhood filled with familiar faces and blooming flowers. Sometimes life only looks like it is ending because something better has quietly begun. Emily looked toward the flower shop that had once seemed impossible to save. She realized the greatest change had never happened to the building, the business, or even the neighborhood. It had happened inside the people who had learned that hope grows much like a garden. It asks for patience, faithful hands, and the courage to believe in flowers long before the first bloom appears. The road that once witnessed fear had quietly been waiting to celebrate hope. One warm Saturday evening in early summer, Daniel asked Emily and Lily if they would like to take a short drive before sunset. He offered no explanation beyond a gentle smile that had long ago become impossible for either of them to refuse. They drove through familiar streets until the city slowly faded behind rows of tall evergreens and open fields touched by golden light. As the car rounded one final curve, Emily immediately recognized the narrow stretch of road where her aging station wagon had broken down more than a year before. The old streetlight still stood beside the shoulder. The same rolling hills stretched toward the horizon. Even the breeze carried the familiar scent of rain lingering somewhere far away, although the sky above remained perfectly clear. Daniel parked quietly along the roadside and stepped out carrying a carefully wrapped bouquet of white lilies, ivory roses, eucalyptus, and delicate baby's breath. Emily smiled the moment she saw it because she remembered another bouquet almost exactly like it. Lily looked around with curious eyes before asking, "Why are we here?" Daniel knelt beside her with the bouquet resting gently in his hands. "Because sometimes it is important to remember where beautiful things begin." They walked together toward the place where Emily's station wagon had once stood helpless beneath the storm. Nothing dramatic remained there now. No flashing lights. No pouring rain. No fear. Only warm evening sunshine covering the pavement where 2 strangers had unknowingly stepped into each other's lives. Daniel handed the bouquet to Emily without speaking. She accepted it slowly, running her fingertips across the soft petals while memories returned one by one. She remembered the sound of rain striking the roof of her old car. She remembered the embarrassment of sending a message to the wrong number. She remembered believing that nobody would come. Most of all, she remembered seeing one pair of headlights appear through the storm when hope had almost disappeared. Emily looked toward Daniel with quiet emotion shining in her eyes. "If I had checked the phone number one more time," she whispered, "none of this would have happened." Daniel smiled gently as the evening breeze moved through the wildflowers growing beside the road. "Then I am grateful you made a mistake." Lily laughed softly without completely understanding the conversation, but she reached for both of their hands anyway. Together they stood beneath the fading sunlight, while birds drifted across the open sky above them. After a long, peaceful silence, Emily looked back toward the road where countless cars continued traveling without ever knowing the story hidden beside it. "People spend so much of life trying not to make mistakes," she said quietly. Daniel nodded. "Sometimes wisdom is not avoiding every wrong turn. Sometimes it is recognizing the unexpected gift waiting at the end of one." Emily rested her head lightly against his shoulder for a brief moment, while Lily leaned comfortably beside them, holding each of their hands with complete trust. There were no reporters, no cameras, no speeches, no audience waiting to applaud. Only three ordinary people whose lives had been forever changed because one message reached the wrong phone at exactly the right time. As the sun slowly disappeared beyond the distant hills, Emily looked once more at the quiet roadside before smiling with peaceful certainty. She finally understood that destiny does not always arrive with perfect plans. Sometimes it quietly borrows the shape of an honest mistake so that kindness can find the person who needs it most, and in doing so, reminds the world that the greatest miracles often begin exactly where certainty comes to an end.